evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, most podcasts put the promotion stuff halfway through or even towards the end. The usual advice with the slightly uncomfortable thing about asking for people help is to do exactly that. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff closer to the front. This show is brought to you by supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going, and help me to reach new audiences are very much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with insomnia, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, if you have the means, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales to take a look at the link in the show notes, or go from the website. If you support the show, you will have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people. And over and above that, there are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month. There are early release of the regular episodes to special edits of the main show and weekly bonus episodes for $5 and up backers. So this week I want to thank Abby F, who signed up recently. She's decided to help me keep the show going so that I can carry on helping her and thousands of other insomniacs. And as a bonus, she gets some nice features as well to give her a little bit more variety into her bouts of insomnia. If signing up for a monthly payment is a little bit much for you, there are other ways to support though. Besides the Patreon, there's the tip jar, the merchandise store, and some others. But another huge way you can help is to simply spread the word. If there's someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I can see and I can thank you. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And I haven't spoken a bit about this for a while, but I want to shout out a supporter of the show, company BetterHelp. If you're struggling mentally with stress or anxiety or anything else, and we all know these are stressful and anxious times, try out BetterHelp. It is a secure online therapy available from licensed professionals. So take a look at trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime. That's trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime. Or take a look on the website to learn more. Sleepy Time Tales listeners get 10% off their first month if you do sign up. So if you're needing a little bit of emotional and mental support out there and want to save a little bit of money doing it, take a look. And last but not least, of course, I need to give a shout out to the music. The track is Un Desire wa Kumiku. Their music is available on their website, which is at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. And they produce stuff under various different names and various different styles. And most of it also is available for use on creative projects. So if you're also a podcaster or a YouTuber or something like that, you can probably find something handy for you there. And so that's Loyalty Freak Music. Go take a look and give them some support. And I think that's it for now. Thank you very much for your patience. Back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning in emotions and turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find you just can't quite get back to sleep in 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to be a bother to them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. When I was younger, I knew a lot of people used to like sleeping with the TV or the radio on, but it was something I was resistant to. I preferred silence to sleep, but I once accidentally discovered when trying to listen to podcasts in the middle of the night that those actually did have a tendency to act almost like a sedative for me. Having the TV on would be bright lights disturbing my sleep, or the radio would have ads or loud music, and that would be something. But there's something about podcasts which are generally pretty tame the whole way through that was just a lot more resistant to me, along with the droning voices of people talking too long about things that weren't particularly interesting to many listeners, I'm sure. I eventually discovered that there are podcasts out there specifically for that. People who are using their interests or their tendency to drone on and on boringly to help people to sleep. And while I found one or two that worked quite nicely for me, when I recommended them to others, they sometimes didn't resonate because sometimes they didn't like the narrator's voice or the topic of the story or something like that. So I thought to myself, I've got this boring, deep, drony voice. Let me give it a try and see if I can help other people. Now, every episode of the show starts with this long intro. It usually goes on for about 15 minutes or so, and it serves a couple of purposes rather. The first one is for new listeners. If you've just discovered the show, you may need someone to explain to you what the point is. Why would you listen to a podcast to help you sleep? What is the point? How do you engage with it? So I need to sort of make a case for people that have discovered the show fresh. But it is also, maybe even more so, is in a lot of ways targeted at people who've been listening for a while. Because bad sleep, insomnia, is kind of like a habit that we've developed over time. We don't have a proper pre-sleep process that allows us to prepare ourselves mentally to go to sleep. And this intro is intended to help that. While you're listening to me go on and on, don't listen too closely unless you really need to know what's up. But just have it going on in the background while you brush your teeth, have a drink of water, get yourself snuggled into your bed, so that basically by the time you actually get to the story, you're already halfway there. Your mind is, especially after a few episodes, your mind is sort of starting to get into a pattern and a habit of being prepared for rest. Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build new habits and trying to build a space together. A space that you are comfortable to rest in and to allow sleep to come. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, I need something to focus on. I need a story or an event that lets me keep my mind on a specific point to stop it from spinning out into stresses and anxieties. I need to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for me. For some people, there might be a second way to engage. You may just need something like white noise. Some people enjoy the sound of rain or the sound of the ocean or wind in the trees, or maybe you enjoy just a boring dude droning in the background. But whatever works for you, that is what counts. And if you engage with it in a different way, please feel free to let me know so I can recommend it to others. Because I'm here to help you to be here for you to engage in listening to the show in whatever way works for you. Tonight we return to Barclay of the Cards. It's a story about an Indian village that's been invaded by some outsiders and some adventures that go on. It is quite an action-packed story tonight, I have to admit, but I'm pretty sure that the way I tell it, it's not going to be all that interesting. But whatever the show is, whether it's action-packed or boring or fiction or non-fiction, this one is fiction, by the way, what is important is how you engage with it. Don't try to force sleep, because I'm sure we've all been there and we know that doesn't work. Just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it may not work for you. It will probably take a few nights. I'd say give it at least 3 to give it a solid try and see how that works. You may need to sort of learn that you can trust me, because having some person speak to you in your sleep is a bit of a strangely, potentially a slightly invasive thing that maybe you need to be comfortable with. Spend some time realizing that I'm just here to look after you. My accent may be strange to you, bit of an unusual one. Even by South African accent standards, mine's a little bit unusual. And also, maybe one episode just isn't long enough, especially if it's early on. What I do with my sleep podcasts, because also my thing lately is I wake up in the middle of the night rather than struggle to go to sleep, is I queue up a whole bunch of episodes of what the podcasts that I listen to. I don't listen to this one. I heard someone once say that trying to sleep, listen to your own voice is like trying to tickle yourself, and it was quite a funny and profound statement, I thought. So I queue up a few episodes of something that I listen to, whether it's Sleep With Me or Boring Books for Bedtime or Nothing Much Happens. Those are my 3 favorites. So if this doesn't work for you, give them a try, because they're excellent shows in their own rights. And I will start usually with the latest episode, and then I'll just let them run all night. If I don't manage to go to sleep early, I have something to drone on in the background for me. And if I do go to sleep, then when I wake up, my earbuds may have fallen out, but I just pop them back in and the stories are going on, and I don't have to look at my phone, and I go straight back to sleep again. Sometimes even take the slightly unusual step of when sometimes I wake up just before my alarm, 30 minutes or 60 minutes before, and what I do in that case is I do exactly the same thing as if it was 3 a.m. Pop my earbuds back in if they're falling out and go back to sleep. I've actually had someone thank me for suggesting that, because a lot of us, I think, will tend to think there's not really much point in trying to sleep for another hour, because we'll probably end up only sleeping 30 minutes and we'll feel exhausted. Or even worse, try to sleep for 30 minutes because we'll probably end up falling asleep right before the alarm again and wake up feeling in a rough state. I got to tell you, when I'm using my sleep podcasts that I listen to and I go to sleep 30 minutes before the alarm, there's something about that little bit of sleep that is so deeply, deeply satisfying. There's something about just allowing yourself deep, perfect relaxation right before the alarm that is just satisfying in a whole new way. But whether it's trying to go to sleep at night or waking up in the middle of the night or waking up early in the morning, it's very important that you try to relax into this. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you. So give it a chance. And you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe it's actually not so small. I don't feel like I do much, but people don't sleep very well these days, and it does make their lives harder. So I'm here to do a small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself if you can't sleep. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, Forgive yourself and we can try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy, but it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and supposed progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. This week, we return to Barclay of the Guides by Herbert Strang. Chapter the 3rd, Sky High. Older son, the gatekeeper, looked gloomily out of the lattice window and watched the proceedings of the invaders. He had spied Dulasar, his master's nephew, among them, and knew that the incident was more than an ordinary raid. Mingal's men gave no sign of any intention to collect the village's property, whether in goods or in animals, and afterwards burn the village. It was clear that the chief meant to either seize the place as his own, or to set his henchman Dulasar at the head of it, and that our son had rightly guessed was proved when Mingal himself came to the foot of the tower, and summoned all within it to descend and salam to their new lord, Dulasar. Ahmed drew the gatekeeper back and put his head out. "What dost thou think of us, Mingal Khan?" he cried scornfully. "Are we asses or even as camels? Know that we hold this tower for our rightful lord Ramut, and thou hast best return to thy little dwelling while there is yet time." The Pathan's face darkened with anger. "Thou darest mock at me, Ferengi dog," he cried. "Come down at once, or we will burn thee alive and send thee to the pit." But Ahmed only laughed. Talk of burning was mere foolishness, for the tower was of stone, and though they might burn the door, there was nothing else inflammable within their reach, save only the barricade which had been thrown across the winding stair. And even a Pathan's courage might shrink from attacking that in face of sturdy defenders, armed with jazels on the stairs. Of this barricade, however, Mingal was as yet unaware, and his reply to Ahmed's scornful laugh was to set his men to make an assault upon the door. But they had no sooner approached it than a matchlock flashed from a narrow slit in the wall, and one of the assailants staggered back with a bullet in his leg. Furious, Mingal shouted to the other men to do his bidding, but another shot fell among them as they crowded about the door. And since they could not see who had fired, nor had any chance of hitting if they shot back, they made haste to flee out of harm's way. And Mingal himself saw that the task he had set them was impossible. The door was of stout and massive timber, and could not be broken in without any deal of hard battering. It would be folly to lose lives in that way when his purpose might be achieved by means of a charge of gunpowder. So he called off his men and bade them search the village for powder, not having brought more with him than was contained in his men's powder flasks. At this, Ahmed chuckled. All the powder lay in 2 large bags in one of the upper rooms of the tower, whither it had been conveyed at the first alarm. The men's hunt through the village was fruitless, but Hassan sighed heavily a little later, when he saw 2 leave the village and gallop at a hot pace in the direction of Mandan. "Mingal has sent for powder, Ahmed Ji," he said. "Without doubt, we shall all be blown up." No, they cannot get back before morning," replied Ahmed, "and every day favours us. Maybe my father will come back earlier than we suppose." "And if he does not?" "Why, then we must defend ourselves as long as we can. Suppose they bring powder. They cannot lay a charge against the door in the daytime, for we could fire into them and blow them up with all their own stuff. And when night comes, the moon will light up the inner wall for some hours, so that they would still be in great danger. and if, when the moon goes to the other side, they contrive to place their charge and blow in the door, it will only be to find us with our jazales at the barricade, and they will never get beyond it. Ahmed's cheerfulness inspirited the old gatekeeper and the rest of the garrison. The women and girls had been conveyed to the upper chambers, and Ahmed, at the fall of night, went up to them and did what he could to reassure them. Once or twice during the night, after the moon had gone down, there were sounds from below indicating that another attempt was to be made on the door. But a shot from the window was sufficient to send the men scuttering back to the houses, and the hours from midnight to dawn passed undisturbed. The garrison snatched a little sleep and were aroused by the morning cry of the mullah in the village mosque, calling the faithful to awake. Prayer is more than sleep. It was afternoon when the two men who had left the village were seen returning with 3 others, their horses loaded with bags which no doubt contained gunpowder. They were received with shouts of wah wah from their comrades as they entered the gate. Ahmed, watching them with Hassan and the others, saw them convey the powder to a lean-to beside the gatekeeper's hut against the wall. There was great cheerfulness among Bengal's men who had idled away the day in gambling. Early in the morning, Ahmed had seen 3 of them leave the village in the opposite direction from Mandan, and going to the top of the tower, he had watched them ride for some 2 miles until they reached a hillock, whose summit rose a little higher than the tower roof. There they dismounted and led their horses into a thin copse. They did not reappear, and Ahmed guessed that they had been sent there as an outpost to guard against any surprise from the sudden return of Ramad Khan. It was clear that Bengal was resolved to carry through his design to the uttermost. Confident as he was in appearance, Ahmed in reality felt no little anxiety. The quantity of powder brought into the village by Bengal's messengers was large enough not merely to blow in the door and the barricade, but even to make a breach in the tower wall. He knew very well that if the enemy once forced their way into the tower, the case was hopeless. For the men he had with him were all well on in years, and with the fatalism of their race, they would regard the first success of the enemy as a clear sign of heaven's favour. It seemed to him imperative that Bengal should be by some means prevented from succeeding in any part of his purpose, and as the afternoon wore on, he took counsel with Hassan, telling him frankly of his anxieties. "What you say is true," said the old man, "but how is it possible to do anything? They have the powder, may their graves be defiled, and when it is dark, we shall not be able to see to take aim at them as they bring it to the door. If we had but one friend in the village, the cowards, and they are fools as well to desert a chief like my father for one like Bengal Khan. Were there one brave man having any wits among them, he would blow up that powder, and our trouble would be gone." Hassan could only sigh and wish that the chief had not gone horse raiding. He is too old for such deeds. 'Tis time he rested and made ready to obey the last call. Aye, and some day if he continues thus he will fall into a snare. Some calamity will light on him. It may be with him even as it was with Mir Ismail of Mangash. Why, how was it with him? He had gone on just such an errand, and he was old, like our master Ramut. He had cut a hole in the stable of the Malik he had gone to rob, and was in the very act of loosening the horse's halter when he was disturbed by a noise. Lo, he made haste to escape by the hole he himself had made, but being old and stiff, he had got but his head and shoulders out, when his legs were caught from behind. Hi, and then he was in desperate fear lest he should be dragged back and known by his captors, for he was a famous stealer of horses, and he would have snapped his heartstrings if they saw him and gloated over his capture. The honour of his family and people would be besmirched. Wherefore he cried aloud to his son, who waited outside, bidding him cut off his head rather than let that shame fall upon him. His head being gone, they would not recognize his trunk. "And did his son obey him?" asked Ahmed. "He did, and so was the honour of his house saved," replied the old man. Ahmed was silent for a minute or two, Then he said, "Son, think you I could cut a hole in that shed where the powder bags are laid?" "Aye, how wouldst thou get there?" said the gatekeeper. "Verily not by the door. Were it opened, Mingol's dogs would burst in." "True, but could you not let me down over the wall by a rope?" "And what then? The gates are shut. There is no entrance." "But I know of a place, on the other side of the village, where there are notches in the wall, by which I might mount. And the wall scaled, I could steal my way into the shed and maybe cut a hole and lay a train, and so fire the powder that lies there for our destruction." "You could never get over the wall unspied," said the old man, "and if they catch you, you are dead." "But the place where I can scale the wall will be in darkness when the moon shines on the tower. If it is to be done, it must be done before the moon has crept round, for as soon as the tower door is in darkness, be sure they will set about their purpose." Ahmed was deaf to all entreaties, and about an hour before the earliest moment when the besiegers might be expected to begin their operations, he was let down by a rope from a window overlooking the wall, this side being in deep shadow. Having reached the ground, he stole along at the foot of the wall, until he came to a spot some little distance away where he believed the notches to be. They had not been made intentionally, but were due to the crumbling of the clay of which the wall was made, and had not been filled up. He found them without difficulty, the other side of the wall being at this point partially illuminated, while the inner side, in the shadow of the houses, was dark. Pausing a moment to make sure that all was quiet within, he set his bare foot in the lowest notch, and aiding himself with his hand, heaved himself slowly up. When his head was just below the top of the wall, he waited again, listening intently for sounds of movement or speech within the village. All was quiet in the immediate neighborhood, though voices came faintly to his ear from the direction of the tower. He raised his head and peered over. Nothing was to be seen. Then, with a final heave, he rolled himself over the top, hung by his hands for a moment or two until his feet found a hollow to rest in, and then as quickly as might be made this descent, dropping the last 6 feet and alighting noiselessly on his bare soles. A narrow lane ran between the wall and a large barn in which the villagers' grain was stored. Beyond this was the smithy, the potter's house, and 1 or 2 small buildings, so that he could come with fair security to within a few feet of the shed where the powder lay. These last few feet of space were not screened, and in crossing them his risk would be greatest. Having come to the edge of it, he passed round the corner of the building and saw to his joy that the enemy was hid from his view by the projecting shed itself. He stole along by the wall, gained the side of the shed, and without an instant's delay set to work with a chisel he had brought with him to loosen one of the planks on the wooden side, working with all possible silence. Once the light sound of a footstep caused him to scurry back into the shadowed lane, but the disturber, whoever he was, passed in another direction, and Ahmed sped back to finish his work. Having removed the plank, he squeezed through into the shed without much difficulty, being slim, and groping about, soon laid hands on one of the powder bags. In this he cut a hole, then laid a train of powder to the opening in the shed wall, lighted the slow match Hassan had furnished, and, breathing hard, ran like a deer back along the lane. At first he could not find the spot where he had descended the wall, and feared lest the explosion should occur before he had regained the tower. But discovering the place at length, he swarmed up, and now in his haste ventured to drop the full height of the wall. He fell on his face, rose in an instant, and scampered back to where the rope still dangled from the window. He had but just laid hands on it when there was a deafening explosion, followed by a great outcry from the men. When he regained the top of the tower, he ran with Hassan and the others to a window whence he could look down upon the scene. The shed was in flames, and he was surprised to see 2 or 3 forms prone on the ground near it. One of the men who had been keeping watch told him that several of the enemy had come to the door of the shed, no doubt to bring out the powder at the moment when the explosion took place, and had been hurled to the ground by the flying timbers. Mangal and Dilasar were raging up and down among their men. They looked on helplessly while the shed burnt. Mangal crying out that there was a traitor in the village. The street and the open space in front of the tower were crowded with people who had been startled from sleep by the uproar, and Mangal in his fury sent his men among them to slash and slay. The poor villagers ran away and hid themselves, a son declaring that they deserved no pity because they had deserted their rightful master for the invader. There was much rejoicing in the tower at the success of Ahmed's bold enterprise. Even the most faint-hearted now took courage, but it was clear that the enemy had no intention of departing. The failure of their scheme had made them only more vindictive. Mangal sent some of his men for more powder. The rest, keeping well out of gunshot, squatted against the walls of the houses, ready to prevent any egress from the tower. It was plain that Mangal meant to make another attempt, and if he failed to gain entrance, to starve the defenders out. Ahmed did not fear the first, but was greatly troubled at the prospect of a prolonged siege. In the few minutes' grace between his arrival in the village and coming of the enemy, there had not been time to convey a large supply of food and water into the tower. The water was already running short, and it was necessary to put the inmates on a scanty allowance. With great economy, they might make it last for 2 or 3 days. Then, unless help came, there would be no choice but to surrender, or to make an attempt to escape at night by means of the rope. Mangal, as yet, clearly, had no suspicion that the powder had been fired by anyone from the tower. It might be easy for the men and boys to let themselves down as Ahmed had done, but would not be so easy for the women and girls to descend in the same way, and the least sound would bring the enemy upon them. From the top of the tower during that day, Ahmed cast many an anxious glance in the direction whence his father might be expected to return, but there was no sign of him, and indeed, but for some mischance in his expedition, it was hardly likely that he would be back for several days. In the afternoon, Mangal's messengers returned with another supply of powder. As ill luck would have it, with the fall of night, a thick mist came down upon the village, obscuring the moon, and under cover of the darkness, the men brought powder to the tower door and fired it. The door, massive as it was blown to splinters, and with yells of triumph, the assailants rushed in when the smoke had cleared, confident that they were on the point of mastery. But the defenders had had ample time to prepare for them, and when, ignorant of the barricade, they began to rush up the winding stairs, Dilasar being at their head, they were met with a sharp fusillade which struck down several of them and sent the rest scuttling away with yells of alarm. Dilasar himself was among those who were wounded, and Ahmed, from his conning post above, could dimly see his rival being carried away by 2 of the men. This setback, while it eased Ahmed's position for the moment, had the effect of making the enemy still more determined. Hitherto, the most part of the men had not been greatly interested in the business. The quarrel was a personal one of their chiefs. For themselves, they would have been satisfied with plundering the village and returning to their own place. Even though Mangal inflamed their racial and religious prejudices against Ahmed as one of the hated Feringis, they saw little to gain by capturing or killing him. But now they had themselves suffered, their warlike instincts and their passion for revenge were aroused, and moreover they were netted by their failure, considering that they outnumbered the defendants by at least 10 to 1. The night passed quietly, but evidence of their new spirit was shown next day. Ahmed, looking from his window, saw signs of great activity below, though for a time neither he nor his son nor any other of his comrades understood what was afoot. By and by, however, it became clear that the enemy were busily constructing shields of wood and goatskins, with which to defend themselves against musket shots from beyond the barricade. The work was apparently finished by midday, for the men squatted in groups on the ground, taking their dinner and talking with great cheerfulness. But when the hours of the afternoon went by without the expected attack, Ahmed concluded that it was put off till night, and felt that this time it would be pushed home. Defended by their shields, the men could easily bring powder to the base of the barricade, and if that was blown away, it was only a question of minutes. It was useless to attempt to disguise from his comrades the great danger in which they stood, especially as they were now reduced to their last pitchers of water. Now Hassan made a proposal. "'Tis time for you to leave us, Ahmed G," he said. "Mangal, that son of a dog, is bent on seizing you. It matters little about the rest of us, but you are the apple of the master's eye, and if you are safe, 'tis of little moment what happens to us. We shall become Mangal's men, we shall at least be saved alive. Do you then escape by the rope when darkness falls and run to the hills, where you may hide until the master returns, and when you are gone, after a time, we will deliver ourselves up to Mangal." This suggestion was applauded by the other men. They had in truth little to gain by further resistance. If their lives were spared, they would only pass into the service of another chief, and since Mingal's star seemed to be in the ascendant, that was a fate which all expected sooner or later to befall them. But Ahmed was very unwilling thus to throw up the sponge. Apart from his disinclination to desert his post, he knew how his father would be cut to the heart at the triumph of his arrival, and felt that he himself would be forever disgraced if this calamity should come upon the old chief during his absence. Yet he felt the impossibility of holding out much longer, and was troubled at the thought that all those with him might be killed if he did not yield. "I will go apart and think over what you have said," he said to the man, "and I will come again and tell you my thoughts." He went to the top of the tower and, leaning over the parapet, began to ponder the difficult situation in which he found himself. And as he was sadly thinking that there was no other course than to surrender, for to run away and leave his comrades was abhorrent to him, his eye was suddenly caught by a small dark patch moving on the hillside far away, towards the British frontier. The sun was behind him, the air was clear, and gazing at what had attracted his notice, he was not long in coming to the conclusion that the dark shadow on the hill was a body of horsemen. A great hope sprang up in his mind. It might be Ramut returning with his men. True, it might be a band belonging to another chief, or even a troop of British horsemen, or of natives in the British pay. Keen as his eyes were, it was impossible at this distance, at least 12 miles as he judged, to tell who the men were. But they were certainly approaching, though very slowly. They were coming from the very quarter whence his father would return. There was at least a good chance that they were friends. He ran down at once to the room where Hassan and the rest were awaiting his return, and told them of what he had seen. They went back with him and looked eagerly across the plain. The horsemen appeared to have halted. They were no nearer than when he had seen them last. None of his comrades were better able than he to identify them. "Let us make a beacon here," said one of the men. "If they are our own people, they will ride at once to our help. If they are not, we shall be none the worse off." "No, no," said old Hassan. "It would be a foolish thing to do. Bengal's men cannot have spied them yet. We at this height can see many miles further than they below, and they cannot have been seen by the outpost on the hillock yonder, for look, the copse is between them. Let us do nothing to put our enemies on guard, and besides, we say we light a beacon and our master comes riding to our help. Bengal, seeing the fire, would know its meaning, and even though he saw not the master's troop, he would suspect, and lay in ambush, and the master might be killed." "But then how can we bring them to us?" asked Ahmed. "They have halted, as you see. Perhaps they have had a long day's march and are tired. Perhaps they may encamp for the night, and if they do, or even if they continue to come slowly towards us, they may arrive too soon. Shall we fire shots?" "That is no better than to light a beacon," said Hassan. "The shots would bring them fast enough to us, but as thou knowest, Ahmed G, the sound of their riding would be heard while they were yet far away, and they have but to come a little nearer to be seen by the outpost. The end would be the same. Mungal would lie in readiness to meet them, and they would fall into his hands. Yet we must do something, cried Ahmed, and before it is dark. When night comes we shall be attacked and overcome, and my father, when he hears the firing, will come up in haste, and as you say, the sound of his riding will be heard. Having overcome us, Mungal would have time to prepare to meet him. There is one way, Ahmed Ji, said Hassan slowly. One of us must go down the rope and haste to meet him and give him warning of what has befallen us here. And who better than thyself? Thou art swift of foot and skilled in the secret tracking down of prey. Who more fit to undertake this errand, or more likely to accomplish it? This was perfectly true, but the old man had another motive. There was still uncertainty whether the horsemen were friends or foes, and he wished in either case to secure the lad's safety. Ahmed did not see through the gatekeeper's design. He knew that, of the company there assembled, he would have the best chance of success, and so he agreed, and as soon as dusk fell, to slip down the rope, make his way around the village, and set off towards the distant hill on which the dark patch could still be seen, stationary. It wasn't until 2 hours of dusk when this decision was come to. During that time, Ahmed and the gatekeeper talked over the plan, and as they did so, they saw the band of horsemen began to move once more slowly towards them. They were at once alive to a danger. The horsemen were at least 12 miles from the village. At the pace which they appeared to be riding, it would take them 4 hours to reach the walls. But when they had covered half the distance, they would come in sight of the outpost on the hillock. The alarm would be given, and they would arrive only to fall into a trap. Yet it was impossible to warn them. It would be unsafe for Ahmed to leave the tower until the approach of dark, and by that time the horsemen might have come within view from the hillock. Ahmed waited in great restlessness and anxiety, feeling his helplessness. "'Tis in the hands of Allah," said Hassan, trying to quiet him. "What is to be, will be. But that thou hast Ferengi blood in thee, Ahmed Ji, thou wouldst not be so disturbed. We cannot hasten the dark. We cannot speak through the air to warn the master. But look what Allah can do. They have halted again." And pointing over the parapet, he showed that the dark, irregular shadow had rested a little lower down the hill, upon which lay the glow of the now setting sun. As soon as the dusk was merging towards dark, Hassan was let down by the rope. Hassan had promised to hold out against any attack that Mungal might make. Then, creepily, stealthily, along by the foot of the wall, he continued till he came to a place where the ground was broken by a nullah, into which he leapt, and ran along its dry bottom at full speed until he arrived safely in the hills. By this time it was quite dark, but the moon was just rising, and in a little he was able to see by its light to guide his steps, so that he did not stumble into a ravine or trip over a salient rock. As he came near the place where the outpost was stationed, he went very cautiously. The men had taken shelter in a rude shepherd's cairn. He saw the faint glow of the charcoal fire and heard their voices as he slipped by. Then he pushed on at greater speed, choosing a course in which he would never come within sight of the men, however carefully they might keep watch. At one spot he halted and looked behind, to catch a last glimpse of the tower before he rounded the base of a hill that would hide it from view. The moon was shining full upon it, and he hoped that the enemy would defer their threatened attack, as at the first attempt, until the door was shrouded in darkness. On and on he hastened, for mile after mile, running down the slopes where he could, wading brooks, climbing bluffs, doggedly without rest. When he came to an eminence where he could scan a long stretch of the comparatively level ground over which the horsemen would come, he looked eagerly for some sign of them. But though the greyish soil shone white in the moonlight, and the outlines of things were very clear, he failed to descry them, and could not but think that they had encamped for the night. If it was so, still greater was the necessity for speed, since at any moment the attack on the tower might be begun, and the frail barricade forced or blown up. Every now and again he paused for a moment to listen, both for sounds from the village behind him and for the hoofs of horses. In the still air of the night, the crack of musket shots might well reach him if the assault on the tower were begun. But he heard nothing save the rustle of falling water or the cry of a jackal. And he went on again, buoyed up by the great hope that he might be in time. At length, heated and weary after breasting a steep knoll, he espied in a well-sheltered hollow far below him the glow of campfires. With the caution habitual in a hillman, he crept down warily. If he should blunder into a hostile party, the chances of saving the village and warning his father would be small indeed. Taking cover from bushes and angular projections of hillside, he drew nearer and nearer to the camp. He had little fear of encountering a sentry, for the Pathans in some matters highly cautious, or in others equally careless. And thus he came within earshot of the camp, and lying flat on his face, peered down to spy if the men there were or were not his friends. Now he was able to see the dark forms of a number of horses tethered to trees beyond the camp, and in the middle of the hollow, around the fires, the shapes of sleeping men. Still he was unable to distinguish them. He wriggled forward on all fours until he was within a spear cast of them, and then caught sight of the red turban which his father always wore. No other man of the tribe wore a turban of that colour, but still it might be affected by one of another tribe, and Ahmed was not yet satisfied. So he crept very stealthily around the encampment till he reached the line of horses, and his heart leapt with delight when, on the very first of the line, he recognized the housings of Rahmat Khan's favourite Arab. He hesitated no longer, but gave a low hail, and rising to his feet, walked down towards the fires. His call, low as it was, had reached the ears of several of the men, and of the chief himself. They rose, gripping their long muskets that lay beside them, and as they recognized Ahmed, they came forward to meet him, and asked him eagerly the meaning of his nocturnal visit. It did not take him long to explain what had happened. Growling with anger, but breaking off to speak a fond word of approbation to Ahmed, the old chief called to his men to mount their horses. "Bah," he cried with a scornful intonation, "we will see if the eagle cannot deal with the nighthawk." The blood of the old warrior was up. Bengal should rue the day when he conceived the folly of setting himself in rivalry to Rahmat Khan. The chief was quick to form his plan. The first thing was to guard against any alarm among Bengal's men. It was necessary to silence the two men of the outpost. This would cause some delay, but it was of the first importance that they should neither see nor hear the advancing body, since by firing their matchlocks they could put their comrades in the village on alert. It was 7 miles from the camp to the outpost. Rahmat durst not ride towards it with his full body of men, for the clatter of 50 horses' hoofs could not fail to be heard. Yet the case was urgent, for very soon, perhaps even at this moment, the tower might be assaulted. Delay there must be, but to lessen it as much as possible, Rahmat decided to muscle the hoofs of 3 of the horses with strips of blanket, and to send 3 of his men with Ahmed to surprise the outpost. Meanwhile, he himself, with the rest of his party, would ride in a circular course to the southward, so that they might sweep around the dangerous point at sufficient distance to be out of earshot. The muffling was soon done, and the 3 chosen men set off, Ahmed being mounted behind one of them. Following his directions, they came unerringly to within a short distance of the hillock upon which the scouts were posted. Then they dismounted, and Ahmed leading the way, they crept round and up, so as to come on the men from above. The scouts were reclining in the cairn behind the fire, still talking in low tones. There was a rush, a cry, a wild scuffle, and then silence. Their task accomplished, the 4 returned to their horses and galloped across the country to join the main body, whom they met at their appointed rendezvous, a copse on rising ground some 3 miles south of the village. From that point, Rahmat had decided to make the advance on foot, so that the chances of premature discovery by the enemy should be diminished. The moon was sinking in the sky. They could not see the tower from the place where they dismounted, but the favourable moment for Mungal's intended assault had certainly now come, and Ahmed expected to, within a little, to hear the sound of firing. The whole party, save a few men left to guard the horses, set off at a rapid march towards the village. It was possible that as they approached it, a keen lookout might descry them from the tower, but they would be invisible to anyone on a lower level. True, a man perched on the wall might see them, but Mungal, having posted scouts on a hillock commanding all the surrounding country for several miles, would be little likely to take this extra precaution. Marching rapidly, the party had come within a few hundred yards of the village wall when they heard an explosion, followed by cries and the crack of muskets. The assault had begun. The gates being shut, it was only possible to enter the village by climbing the wall, and Ahmed led the band at the double to the spot where he had mounted when he fired the powder in the shed. Shouts and the sound of firing still came from the village. It was clear that a desperate fight was in progress, and since the din must drown out all other noises, Ramut's troops made no effort towards silence, but rushed with all speed. The place for which Ahmed was making was on the opposite side of the village from the tower. Thus it was possible to climb the wall without attracting the attention of the enemy. Ahmed was first up. While some of the men were following him one by one, he ran around to the gate on the chance that it might be left unguarded. He would then throw it open and give admittance to the rest of his party. But when he came within sight of it, he found that a sentry was on guard there. He dare not risk the sound of a scuffle, so he slipped back to his friends and waited until the whole party had climbed the wall. Then, drawing his talwar, Ramut put himself at the head of his men, and led them through the streets towards the tower. Their advance was not at first seen, for the villagers, drawn out of their houses by the sounds of fighting, had flocked to the neighbourhood of the tower and were watching the progress of Mungal's attack. The barricade at the foot of the winding stair had been blown up, and a fierce contest was now going on. Hassan and his comrades were making a stout resistance, buoyed up by the belief that their chief was coming to their help. But they were on the point of being overpowered when a great shout arose from the street, and Ramut and his men burst through the ranks of onlookers and fell upon the rear of Mungal's forces. The surprise was complete. The newcomers laid about them dully with their terrible swords. Their enemies fell into a panic, and in a few minutes the whole crowd, save those who had already fallen, were running in every direction. Many of them were cut down as they fled. Some made straight for the gate, which the men stationed there had thrown open at the first sign of what was happening. Among the fugitives was Mungal Khan. Ramut had ordered his men to take the chief rival alive, but in the darkness it was difficult to distinguish one from many, and Mungal made good his escape to few of his followers and fled away into the night. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes are released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.